Hello, and welcome to SGNA's webinar titled SGNA Approver Unit Commercial Support and Sponsorship 2014. My name is Cindy Freese, and I'm the Associate Executive Director of Clinical Affairs for the Society of Gastroenterology Nurses and Associates. Thank you for joining us. While this presentation does not have contact hours attached to it, we wanted to provide you with an example of the elements that need to be included with any CNE presentation. Therefore, we are including a statement of disclosure. And this is to say that the Society of Gastroenterology Nurses and Associates is accredited as a provider of continuing nursing education by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. In regards to disclosure, relationships with commercial interest organizations whose products are related to program content include none. The purpose of the presentation today is to review the key concepts of commercial support and sponsorship as they relate to continuing nursing education. Our objectives for today are to, number one, identify commercial support and sponsorship related to continuing nursing education planning and presentation, and two, to describe actions to take when commercial support and sponsorship take place. Before we get started, let's take a quick pretest. And you're not going to be graded on this, but let's go ahead and look at some of these questions. Now, which of the following statements are true? Which of the following are true? Commercial support and sponsorship are exactly the same thing. Number two, exhibitor or vendor tables are considered commercial support. Number three, commercial support entities may help in developing the content of your CNE activity related to their goods and products. And four, you should never accept commercial support for your CNE activity. Okay, after you've looked at those questions, keep in mind what the answers are for each one of the four statements, and we will go through some of the additional information. Hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have all the answers. Okay, just as a review, the American Nurses Credentialing Center has developed content integrity standards. The ANCC's content integrity standards for industry support in continuing nursing education activities serves as the main resource for this issue. The content integrity standards exist to help planners to help providers plan, implement, and evaluate quality CNE activities with integrity and free from the undue influence of commercial interest organizations. Now, according to the ANCC standards of commercial support, CNE should be free from all influence. CNE should be free from all bias. CNE should be effective in improving practice and be based on reliable content which is independent of commercial interests. Let's look at some definitions regarding this subject. And commercial support refers to any financial or in-kind contributions given by a commercial interest that are used to pay for all or part of the costs of a CNE activity. Providers of commercial support may not be providers or co-providers of an educational activity, and this is important to note. Looking further, the definition of a commercial entity is defined as any entity producing, marketing, or distributing healthcare goods or services which are consumed by or used on patients, or an entity that is owned or controlled by an entity that produces, markets, resells, or distributes healthcare goods or services consumed by or used on patients. Now, there are some exceptions to commercial interest entities, and those include acute care hospitals, whether they be for-profit or non-for-profit, health insurance providers, government entities, nursing homes, diagnostic labs, or rehabilitation facilities. Those are some of your exceptions. Now, there's some key principles to commercial support, and these are two very important points to remember. Now, commercial interest entities can provide funding and other support for CNE activities, but they must follow these two key principles. Number one, commercial support must not influence the planning, development, content, implementation, or evaluation of the CNE. And number two, the commercial support must be disclosed to the learners. There are different types of commercial supports, and here's some examples. They may be unrestricted educational grants, or they can be restricted educational grants. The unrestricted grants may be provided to an organization and used as necessary. The restricted grants may be provided in the form of funding for a specific presentation, scholarship, food and beverage for a conference, conference bags, or your flash drives. What's important to remember, regardless of the type of support, whether it be restricted or unrestricted, the funding goes directly to the provider. It goes directly to the provider. Commercial support can be financial, or it can be in kind. Financial support is money supplied by a commercial interest entity to be used by the provider for expenses related to the CNA activity. And in-kind support can include money, or it can include materials, space, equipment, or other non-monetary resources or services used by a provider to conduct the CNA activity. In-kind support may not include the promotion of a good or service of the commercial interest entity. And just to make a note, any commercial support must be disclosed. Again, whether it be financial or in-kind, in nature, both have to be, both types do need to be disclosed. Now, it is possible to accept commercial support for your CNA activity as long as a formal agreement is signed by both parties. And both parties meaning the applicant, and that would be you, and the commercial entity. The commercial support agreement stipulates that a commercial entity will have no influence on the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the activity. And it also indicates the nature of the support. It's important to note, you can find the CSA template on the SGNA Approver Unit website. You might want to take a look at that before you start planning, or as you're planning your program, so that you know the elements of the agreement before you reach out to your commercial entities. Once the CSA, or the Commercial Support Agreement, has been signed and the commercial support is ready to move forward, the applicant must ensure that the agreement is followed. So it's not enough just to sign the agreement, it does need to be followed. Additionally, disclosures must be provided to the learners prior to the start of the activity. So before the session begins, you will need to let the learners know that funding has been provided for the presentation, whether it be financial or in-kind. There are some exceptions to commercial support. For example, fees for exhibitor tables or booths fall under a different jurisdiction. They fall in a different category, and they are not considered commercial support. So if you are receiving funding or fees for exhibitor tables and booths, you don't need to have a commercial support agreement signed for that. Sometimes it helps to take a look at some case scenarios. So we've developed a couple just to help with your understanding of this issue. So let's look at case scenario 1. The scenario is that Company Z agrees to provide commercial support for your 2-day regional conference. However, Company Z has a couple of provisos. First, they have a clinical educator who works for them and has an excellent course already prepared with all the objectives and content complete. Everything has been developed. They want her presentation to be included in your conference. Also, Company X would like to serve as a co-provider of your course and to help determine the other course objectives. The question is this scenario acceptable? let's look at some issues regarding this scenario. Commercial entities are not allowed to participate in the planning, implementation, or evaluation of the CNA activities. The program planners are the ones who are obligated to develop the content and the objectives independent of the commercial entity influence. Since the presentation they are proposing is already complete, this will not have occurred. Additionally, commercial entities are not allowed to serve as co-providers of any CNE activities. So some actions that might take place are for you to request that the commercial support provisos be changed. If the commercial entity refuses to do so, do not accept the support. Okay, let's look at another case scenario regarding commercial support. In this scenario, Company Red has provided commercial support for your half-day GI Nurses Day program for several years running, and they're a good partner. They provided an unrestricted educational grant with no influence on the content of your program. Since your region has a long-standing relationship with Company Red, they would prefer not to sign the commercial support agreement. The question is this scenario acceptable? Okay, let's look at some issues regarding this scenario. Now, the completion of the commercial support agreement is a requirement for the completion of the CNE application. Regardless of past experience with a commercial entity, the CSA will need to be signed. Actions: request that Company Red reconsider signing the commercial support agreement and share the ramifications of not signing the agreement. Let them know that if they don't sign the agreement, you cannot accept their support. If the commercial entity refuses, if Company Red still declines to sign the agreement, do not accept the support. Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's look at sponsorship. Sponsorship refers to any financial or in-kind contribution that does not fit the category of commercial interest. An example might include a hospital or foundation. A formal agreement must be signed by both parties, and again, that is the applicant and the sponsor. The sponsorship agreement stipulates that the entity will have no influence on the planning, implementation, and evaluation of the activity, and the sponsorship agreement will also indicate the nature of the support. Again, you will find a template of the SGNA sponsorship agreement on the CE Approver Unit website. And again, you will want to take a look at that as you're planning your program. Now, looking at sponsorship versus commercial support, these two types of support are not the same. They require different agreements, and they stem from different types of organizations. We've gone over the differences between commercial support or commercial entities and sponsorship entities, and that's the major difference. So they are not the same thing. They both provide the support, but the genesis of the support is quite different. So they are not the same thing. So let's look at a scenario with regarding sponsorship. So in this scenario, Hospital X agrees to allow you the use of their auditorium free of charge for your regional program. Since two of the program planners work for Hospital X and there is no money involved, no agreement needs to be signed. Is this scenario acceptable? Let's look at some issues regarding this. Support may be financial or in kind. The completion of the sponsorship agreement is a requirement for the completion of the CNE application regardless of the amount or type of support. So some actions: request that Hospital X complete the sponsorship agreement. Again, share the ramifications of their not signing the agreement. If the sponsor refuses, do not accept the support. Another thing to consider when thinking about commercial support and sponsorship is conflict of interest. And that's a whole other subject area. But just for purposes of our presentation today, some key items to remember is that commercial support and conflict of interest are not the same. They're not the same thing. Commercial support does not arise from conflict of interest, but rather it's the other way around. Conflict of interest arises from commercial interest or commercial support. Wanted to share a few tips with you in regards to commercial support and sponsorship. You want to share the information from these slides with the rest of your planning committee. Review the commercial support and sponsorship agreements prior to your program development. This way, it'll give you an indication of what it is, what type of information you need to get from your, and what the limits of the commercial support and sponsorship may be before you reach out to the different organizations. You might want to share the specific agreement with your potential supporters. That way, that gives them the opportunity to decide if they're going to agree or not agree to the stipulations of not participating in the program content development. Another thing that you might want to do is to review the ANCC Content Integrity Standards for industry support in continuing nursing activities. There's a lot of information on there that might be helpful to you, so you might want to take a look at that just so you can see all the nuts and bolts. Another thing that I didn't include on here, but certainly something to consider, is that the SGNA approver unit is not the only organization or not the only approver unit that maintains commercial support and sponsorship agreements. Any organization, any approver unit that is accredited by the ANCC Commission on Accreditation is obligated to have these forms and to fulfill this criteria. So it really isn't anything, it shouldn't be anything new to organizations that you reach out to. And again, it's also important just to let them know what the ramifications of not signing or not complying with the agreement are. Okay, after we've gone through that information, let's take our post-test. And these questions should look very familiar to you. So let's look here. Number one, which of the following statements are true? Number one, commercial support and sponsorship are exactly the same thing. The second statement, is this true? Exhibitor and vendor tables are considered commercial support. Number three, commercial support entities may help in developing the content of your CNA activity related to their goods and products. And number four, you should never accept commercial support for your CNA activity. Considering all of the information that we have just reviewed, which of the following statements are true? The answer is none of the statements are true, but I'll bet you knew that. Thank you for your time and attention today. If you have any questions regarding commercial support and sponsorship, even before the program application is set to be sent to the SGNA approver unit, don't hesitate to contact us at the SGNA headquarters. You can contact me, Cindy Friest, or Sophie Huckabee, and we'll be happy to help walk you through this process. Thank you again for your time and attention. We look forward to working with you on your next CE application.